If you want more content from We Studios, check us out at weepodcast.com. That's weepodcast.com, where you can find our Simpsons podcast, worst episode ever, our commentary series, Sync Points, other 90s Percentile episodes, our YouTube, our newsletter.
Everything we do is there. And if you want to support everything we do, all you got to do is go to patreon.com/WeStudios to contribute to our Patreon, or go to amazon.wepodcast.com, which will take you right to Amazon, and anything you shop will help support the show.
Thanks, guys.
Enjoy. 60 minutes are on the clock, and straight out of We Studios, this is 90s Percentile. My name is Dan.
My name is Jack, and we're talking everything 90s and maybe also everything before and after.
And we have a guest here with us tonight. He's not here physically, he's here in spirit, and it took a lot of effort to get him here in spirit. Chris Sims is on the line with us. How you doing, Chris?
I'm doing great, and I gotta say, that's the second time I've heard that intro, but it's actually the first time I've heard most of it.
Also, I like
Awesome.
that you said that Chris is here in spirit, and it took a lot of work. You made it sound like it was the Whoopi Goldberg scene from Ghost.
Yeah, we hired a medium to come in and channel Chris from the grave. No, Chris, you're coming to us from North Carolina, and you are a comic book writer, a comic book journalist, I think that'd be fair to say, and a podcaster.
Ex-comic book journalist.
Well, sadly,
Currently.
very, very sadly, you used to write for Comics Alliance, which was one of my absolute favorite websites, so it's very cool to have you here. And you have done some very notable comics work. X-Men 92 for Marvel. That was a great series that I hope a lot of our listeners will check out if they haven't already. And what kind of stuff do you have coming up?
X-Men 92 was co-written with my writing partner, Chad Bowers. We've been writing together since about 2008, I think, September of 2008. And we have some projects coming up together. We've got Sword Quest, which is the first Atari comic in 30 years.
That's awesome.
That comes out on the number 0 issue of that comes out on May 3rd, and it's 25 cents. So please go to your local comic book store and get it super cheap.
Yeah, definitely.
We've also got Deadpool Bad Blood, which is the first ever Deadpool original graphic novel. It's 100 pages, all original, and we plotted it with Rob Liefeld. And Rob drew it, and it's legitimately, I think, some of the best stuff he's ever done. And then we're doing Ash. Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that's awesome on so many levels.
Yeah, it's a shame. It's a shame Deadpool's not very popular right now.
I know. Yeah.
Oh yeah, look, I am really hoping Deadpool is extremely popular.
Oh no, yeah, it definitely. I went to Medieval Times, and for some reason, half of the cosplay was Deadpool related.
Medieval Times?
Not Medieval Times, a Ren Fair.
Oh,
Ren
okay,
Fair,
yeah, that makes sense.
Well,
sort of.
Speaking of Medieval Times, we are also doing Ash versus Army of Darkness, which is another 90s property that Chad and I are writing, and we're picking up right at the end of the movie. Like, Dynamite has had the Army of Darkness license for like 10 years. So it's actually the first comic they ever put out. Like, the first license they ever had was Army of Darkness. But we're kind of going back and picking up like immediately after the movie and trying to do like our own spin on it because there's been so much stuff. So
that's awesome.
Very cool.
That's all we've got coming up. And then Chad is actually writing Youngblood with Jim Toe doing art. That he's doing that one by himself.
Yeah, and that looks really cool. The art on that is like completely redesigned from what Youngblood was in the 90s. Just kind of, I guess, streamlined is what you would say. And it's just that's one that I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, and the story behind that is amazing because it's literally that Jim like tweeted at Rob and was like, hey, I really love Youngblood. Like, I drew some characters. And Rob was like, awesome. And then like a year later, Jim was drawing the book and Chad was writing it.
That is awesome. That's the power of Twitter. And we should actually thank one of our listeners,
yes.
Jason Ibrahim, who tweeted at you and was like, hey, Chris, you should be on this random podcast with people you don't know. And you were very gracious and you were like, yeah, absolutely. So thanks so much.
Like, I've got a lot of free time these days.
Yeah, if any of our other listeners want to do the same thing, tweet out there if there's guests you want to have on the show. Let them know. If you have Tom Hanks in your follow, and you just want to just at Hanks and be like, hey, why don't you be on these guys' show?
Hey, Tommy, why don't you go talk about Forrest Gump with these two?
Is Tom Hanks like the ultimate 90s guest?
Oh, wow.
That is a great question. He's up there for sure.
I mean, yeah. We would have to like find a way to splice in archive podcast footage of him podcasting with former presidents.
Yeah, right. We have to invent new special effects technology to get that to work. Or Steven Seagal would be an interesting 90s guest.
Yeah, who would be the most quintessential 90s person? Celebrity.
Man, I don't even know.
Bill Clinton? I don't know.
Bill Clinton's, yeah, he's up there. But
he might be the guy for that. Jeez, I'm trying to think. Like,
I got it. And this is a little biased because I stumbled upon one of your articles today, and I couldn't help but read it because I have a soft spot for him. But it's a fictional character, Con-El, Superboy with the leather jacket. That might be the most 90s anything ever.
You might be right on that one.
Oh, listen, he's a clone. He's got a fade. He's got a leather jacket. He's got sunglasses that give him heat vision.
Oh, yeah.
Con-El, like, I'm actually rereading that run right now just because, like, not for any reason other than I love that comic. But, it's super 90s, and it's, like, the best part of the 90s. Because, Carl Kiesel and Tom Grummett, like, they're, like, Jack Kirby died in 1993, and, like, the industry was in this weird position of like people thinking that like, oh, Jack Kirby stuff's old fashioned. Like we need to move past that. So nobody was doing anything with Kirby stuff in the early 90s, except in that Superboy book where it's all Kirby stuff, but it's the most 90s Kirby stuff. It's like, yeah, Double X is there, but he's going to go surfing.
Yeah, no, I actually wrote a Superboy spec script when I was 18 or 17 years old, and
you were young and foolish.
I had a trilogy mapped out too. It was the first one would have basically been in Metropolis. The second one would have been in Hawaii. Oh, I was gonna be so much. I had the Newsboys.
I would have loved to have watched Superboy Goes Hawaiian.
Oh, and it was a comedy.
Of course.
Which was, this was before the Iron Man MCU and everything. I even wrote the tagline on the front page of the screenplay. It's a bird. It's a plane. It's trying to buy alcohol.
See that? Like, I feel like we could be friends.
So that's what I'm going with as most 90s celebrity. If anybody here follows Con-El on Twitter,
let him know. Let him know that he's welcome.
Did he come back? I know he died. Is he back?
There's like been three different universes since then, Jack.
Yeah, like there was, I believe the New 52 Superboy was a version of Con-El, but that Superboy no longer exists as of DC Rebirth.
Yeah.
Because Superboy is currently John Kent.
Yeah.
The 90s have died.
Yeah, it's in a very real way. But we're still here talking about the 90s. So, Chris, as our guest, you may not know this, but it is your right to choose our 90s topic tonight, or we can go into the random topic generator where listeners of the show have submitted 90s topics. What do you want to do?
Well, when you contacted me, I was told this, essentially. I don't think I was told about the random 90s topic generator. I do want to give that a spin if we've got some time.
Oh, if we have time, absolutely.
But in honor of X-Men 92 coming out and the third volume, which is called Volume 2 because of comics, there's Volume 0, Volume 1, and Volume 2. Volume 2 collects the last bit of the series, so 14 issues in all available in paperback. Since that's out now and actually just came out last week, I picked something that is very 90s and very near and dear to me, which is X-Men Mutant Genesis.
Oh, man.
The storyline of the relaunched X-Men title from 1991.
We're talking Chris Claremont, Jim Lee, best-selling comic of all time, I think? X-Men number one?
6.5 million copies.
Oh, man.
All right, I'm going to jump in right here with a quick disclaimer for the audience.
Sure.
We already told Chris this before the show. I am not nearly as versed in comics as basically I have a bunch of Con-El comics and that's it. So
your knowledge begins and ends with Superboy.
Pretty much.
I'm sorry, like I don't want to turn this interview around on you, but that's a very specific piece of comics knowledge.
It really is.
I mean, I'm exaggerating a little, but
Jack, you also were the first person to tell me about Bada Bing Bada Boom's Day, which was a Mr. Mixius Pitlick creation.
So I only really read comics from like 94 to 98. On a regular basis. So that basically that period, and only DC comics. So that's really the only, and compared to actual comic guys like you, I really don't know that much.
Sure.
But let me just say this. I just bought this weekend on TeePublic, I bought an electric Superman blue logo t-shirt and an electric red Superman t-shirt.
You have to get them both.
Well, look. I got a couple of things to say about this before we get into the X-Men, before we get into Mutant Genesis.
Sure.
First of all, 94 to 98 DC comics are literally the best time to have read comics.
I know. So I'm spoiled.
You came in on a high note, Jack.
Yeah, like there's so much stuff going on at DC at that time, and it's so good. Like You get the Grant Morrison, Howard Porter JLA relaunch there. In 97, you get like Connell Superboy is good. Like Hitman was coming out as of 96. Like so much good stuff.
I basically stopped at the end of the Millennium Giants run, and he became Superman Forever. He became human again. That was Oh, and then there was this. They what was his name? Something with a D.
You're talking to an expert on this because Chris.
Talking about Dominus.
Dominus, I stopped mid Dominus. That's when I, for whatever reason, I guess I started high school and I kind of just faded out of it.
So a few things to point out.
This
is the second time the Millennium Giants have come up on this show.
I believe it's more than the second time.
The first time they came up, I cited Chris. You did a great series of articles for the Rest in Peace Comics Alliance called Electric Boogaloo, where you were reviewing and critiquing this era of Superman comics. I had no idea that these existed. I knew they existed, but I didn't know that the depth of what the hell went on until I read that series.
Well, nobody ever talks about that stuff.
Yeah.
Everybody knows that like Superman was made of lightning for a year, but I've been part of the sort of comics blogger internet criticism sphere since 2005, like at the kind of rise of kind of snarky retro comics blogging. Like the standing on that Mount Rushmore of where Sean Baby is carved in. And, but those are comics that like everybody kind of is like, like remember when Superman was electric, but nobody went back and talked about how that happened or why it happened. And I felt like that's such an unexamined piece of comics history. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying, am I the first person you ever met that owns a Superman blue and Superman red electric T-shirt? Both, because I couldn't decide.
Now that I know they exist, I would absolutely wear like a Superman blue T-shirt.
You should wear the blue one and I'll wear the red one.
Oh, I was going to say Chris could wear the blue one and I'll wear the red one.
Then what do I wear?
Dominus.
Oh, all right, that's fine.
I don't know. You can wear you'd have to wear Scorn.
Oh,
who's that weird alien from Post-Crisis Kandor.
Oh yeah,
I'm always really fascinated with those weird kind of not necessarily unknown or unremembered, but like the stuff that is thought of as being like purely disposable. Like it happened, but nobody really talks about it. And it was only a year, but it was a year that ran through every Superman book,
right?
Which amounted to 52 plus comics, which is wild to think about, like that not having a huge impact, like that sheer amount of comics that nobody goes back and talks about, which I guess that fascination with sort of unrecognized runs is why I want to talk about the best-selling comic of all time.
Yes. Perfect.
The one that everyone read.
What a great way to get us back on track, Chris.
Let me finish my disclaimer.
What a great way to get us off track, Jack.
I just want to say, so I will be playing the dumb guy here. I'm going to ask stupid questions for the part of our audience, and I don't think it's a big part.
Who's Wolverine?
That also, I mean, they won't be that dumb. But I'll every once in a while, I'm going to ask questions like that, just so some of our listeners can keep up.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm assuming most are on the same page as you guys.
Probably. We have some comic. The comics episodes of this show do pretty well.
Okay.
So Mutant Genesis. This is when the X-Men were split into the blue and the gold team. And if I remember right, X-Men #1 was the blue team, or was it the gold team? Now I'm second guessing myself.
X-Men #1 was the blue team.
Okay.
I believe. So it's the team members on that side are Wolverine, Cyclops, Jean Grey, Rogue, Gambit, Beast, Storm, Archangel, Colossus, and Psylocke.
Right.
I think that's all of them.
And aside from the I think the 3 or 4 at the end there, most listeners would probably recognize that as the lineup from the X-Men, the animated series show that ran on Fox in the 90s. And I think
yes.
I think a lot of people, that was definitely my first exposure to the X-Men. I would say that's true of a lot of people in our general, early 30s age group. And that design came directly from the Jim Lee designs that were used in X-Men #1.
Yeah, Lee had either kind of codified a lot of the designs. This no edits is going to kill me on this. The Cyclops suit with all the pouches was one of Jim Lee's.
Oh, yeah.
The Jean Grey suit that I have always thought is just not my favorite. Like we did everything we could to get her out of that costume in X-Men 92.
Well, the Phoenix costume is such a classic design, and then just bringing her into that weird like headband, metal headband, whatever that was, and then she was just called Jean Grey. Yeah, weird times.
Yeah, like I think Jean is honestly, I think Jean is a really hard done by character in the 90s because she doesn't have a code name. She's saddled with that costume that doesn't really work. And you know, I say that, but like I always thought of Gambit's costume, like when I was a teenager, as being like one of the worst. Like I think if you go back to the very early like 2005 days of my blog, like one of the first things I wrote about was how much Gambit's costume sucks and how it makes no sense because he's a thief who needs to sneak around silently. So he wears a hot pink body armor, metal boots, and gloves that don't cover his fingerprints.
Very, very good points all, Chris.
But going back to it, like, and again, a lot of this is because I worked on these characters and kind of developed a new affection for them through that.
Sure.
Like, I kind of love the distinct looks that they have. And like Rogue's costume, as simple as it is, you know, it's just the sort of green and yellow sandwich style costume with a cool jacket. Like, I think it really works. But Jean, she doesn't have a code name. She's got that kind of bad costume, and she doesn't have what is her defining thing, which is kind of the Phoenix.
Yeah.
So I think Jean post like 1985 and pre-2001 is kind of a rough going, you know?
Yeah, that's. I think you're right on that one. Jack, do you know anything about Jean Grey from that run?
So I mean, it's funny because you say X-Men was the first introduction. The cartoon was the first introduction for a lot of people, and it was in that I caught it a few times, but really I didn't even know Wolverine could regenerate until I saw the movie.
Really?
Like, that's how. I
Wow.
was all DC, so I didn't know anything about X-Men. I only watched a handful of episodes as a kid, but I do remember how weird it was when I would watch the theme song and they had these big giant words on the screen: Wolverine, Cyclops, Jean Grey. It's like, huh?
Yeah,
What?
it's always seemed to me in the theme song like she really got the short end of the stick.
Yeah, and that's what I was as Joey Dum Dum, no comic book boy.
Yeah,
that was my introduction to her. Just it was like, what's her? Is that her name?
She always felt like the Professor and Marianne. Like it was just, and the rest. Jean Grey is here too. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think like if she would have kept the code name Phoenix, I think that would have worked.
Yeah.
But the problem with the X-Men was that at that point, you know, the Phoenix was a separate thing, and you know, they couldn't really go back to Marvel Girl.
Right.
Which was never like a great code name for her. You know, like Angel, like you look at the original 5, Angel, Iceman, a man made of ice. Cyclops, he's got this thing that makes it look like he has one eye and he shoots lasers out of it. Angel, he has wings. And here's Marvel Girl. She's a girl in a Marvel comic.
Do you think
accurate.
Do you think the comics were as influenced by the cartoon as like now it pretty much since Iron Man or maybe even before then the comics have to in some way reflect what's going on in the movies, you know?
You're talking about nowadays.
Yeah, with most major comics,
right?
So I'm curious if before the comic book movies had really come into play, did that give more freedom to writers and artists because they could pretty much do whatever they want, or was the X-Men cartoon big enough that it's like, all right, it's, you know, we have to have everybody wear these outfits and go by these names?
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up because I did, and I think one of the reasons that Chad and I got the job, honestly, was that before we were contacted by Marvel about doing X-Men 92, I had done an episode by episode guide to X-Men the Animated Series, and obviously, you know, the 92 in the title of X-Men 92 refers to a year when the X-Men cartoon debuted, when the X-Men video game debuted. We actually found out in the course of doing it, it's the first X-Men comic in 17 years that wasn't written by Chris Claremont, is cover dated January 1992. Wow. So it really is a new era. But I had done like that. And one of the things that became readily apparent, and one of the things that really influenced our run on the book, was that the show starts out with continuity in a really interesting way. Like Batman the Animated Series debuted, I think, 4 weeks before. And it takes a completely different tack. Like when they sat down to do Batman the Animated Series, they stripped everything out. They boiled everything down to its necessary components. So you don't get a lot of origin stories. You get like Two-Face and Poison Ivy.
Yeah.
But like by the time Batman joins in, but by the time you watch the first episode of Batman the Animated Series, Batman's Batman, the Joker's Joker.
Robin's
you get the
in
Riddler's
college.
origin story later, but yeah, Robin is Robin. Like you only get his origin story in the context of a flashback when he's going after Tony Zuko. So X-Men, on the other hand, brought in all the continuity.
Yeah.
And there's like a flashback scene in that first season where they show like the 60s X-Men, where they show like Marvel Girl and Beast as before he was blue and furry, and Angel and Iceman. And they're like, yeah, this is what we used to do. And there's even episodes where they're like, oh yeah, Doctor Strange exists in this world, and Wolverine used to hang out with Captain America.
Yeah.
And
they fight X Factor at one point.
Yeah, X Factor shows up. Yeah. So the viewpoint character on that show is Jubilee, because Jubilee is new to the X-Men, but the X-Men are not a new thing. And that, I think, really connected with people who, I've talked about this before too. Like when I was looking at X-Men comics as a kid, I couldn't always get the comics. So I would try to piece things together from the trading cards.
Oh yeah, I love the trading cards.
And it was impossible because they're great, and they had that 92 series is drawn by Jim Lee even. Yep. But you would read these little like 2-sentence descriptions of like the Hellfire Club or the Weird Happenings organization or TechNet or whatever. And I just had the feeling, I was like, I will never understand this. Like I desperately want to know everything about this, but I'm never going to understand it.
Yeah.
I got to jump in here with a question about the cards because I know nothing about the cards.
Go for it.
Oh man.
Did they have things like favorite food? Like I know all the Ninja Turtle cards had like favorite food, pizza.
That's a layup. That's an easy one.
It was for all of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
No. I'm not sure what the extent of these cards are.
I definitely had
they had
power
like
levels.
Power rankings.
Yeah.
Okay.
I remember that pretty well.
Could you play games with them? It was like...
No, it was like pre-Magic the Gathering, Pokemon, all that. But the way I actually got into comics was the first series, I think it was 89 or 90, of the Marvel Universe trading cards, which were so huge in my elementary school. And my brother collected them, and I was like, who are all these colorful characters? And that's like how I got into comics.
Back when you were a 20s newsboy.
That's right. When I was on the corner biting nickels to make sure they were real.
So are you saying that there wasn't even one card where it was like Morph's favorite food is pizza?
Ironically, it is pizza, but it didn't say it on his card.
Okay. Actually, Morph's favorite food would be popcorn, I guess, because it
morphs?
Their kernels that morph into popped corn.
Oh, boy.
This is why I'm not writing X-Men comics.
Yeah, I think so.
No, listen, I will take that under advisement. Here's the thing. We could not use Morph.
I was going to say.
Was created for the cartoon.
Yeah, I was going to say I don't remember Morph showing up, which is good because I was not a big fan of Morph.
I don't think anybody was.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, he was created to die in the first episode.
Exactly.
And then ended up coming back.
But I always thought it was so interesting that they created a new character as opposed to one of the hundreds of X-Men characters that already existed. Yeah. I guess they wanted to leave the door open to having whoever, in flashback episodes.
Yeah. Exactly. And they wanted to have the door open to bring in new characters, which they did all the time. Like it's so weird because I kept a running tally when I was doing that episode guide of who had shown up that wasn't Kitty Pryde. Because after you get that X-Men cast, kind of the next most important X-Men is Kitty Pryde. Yeah. And I was like, okay, well, Deadpool's been on this show twice. There's 2 episodes about Cable and his son.
Oh, yeah.
But who ended up being Tolliver. Anyway, getting back to my point.
Wait. Does Kitty Pryde show up in the show?
No, Kitty Pryde never shows up.
She never made the cut?
She never shows up.
Yeah, that's pretty odd. I don't know why. Is it just because she's too similar to Jubilee? Because they kind of played the same role in the 80s and the 90s, yeah.
Because here's the deal with the show. The show takes... Like, the X-Men aren't a new thing. Like, the first episode, the X-Men exist, Sentinels exist, all that stuff is happening. But because the show has this backlog of stories, of what were honestly considered to be probably the best Marvel comic stories at the time, stuff like Dark Phoenix, stuff like God Loves Man Kills, like they have all that they can work from. Yeah. You get the show doing adaptations of stuff like Dark Phoenix. And like even Night of the Sentinels is kind of an adaptation of the first Jubilee story. But the problem is when they get into those shows that are like from the Claremont Byrne era, because they're all wrong. Because not like for one thing, the cast is different. So instead of Colossus, Nightcrawler, and Kitty Pryde, you have Rogue, Gambit, and Jubilee filling those roles.
Yeah.
And it makes the Dark Phoenix saga really weird because you kind of realize that they don't change anything else about like what the characters are up against and who they're fighting. And you kind of realize, well, wait a second, this doesn't, like, you can't just put Rogue in the Colossus part. Rogue can fly. Like, Rogue can absorb people's power. Like, you have to write it differently, and they really don't.
Yeah.
And then there's the second problem, which is that no one can die. Like you talk about Wolverine not having, like, you didn't know Wolverine had a healing factor. That's because Wolverine can't get shot.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Right.
Huh. Batman the Animated Series was like really pushing back against broadcast standards and practices. Like if you ever see the book Batman Animated, there's like a funny gag sketch that Bruce Timm did and like tacked up on the wall at the studio where it was Batman doing, like, it was them doing everything that you couldn't do because of broadcast standards and practices. So it's like Batman and he's strangling the Joker and the Joker's shooting him with a gun, and Catwoman's in the background and she's like smoking a cigarette and she's in like lingerie. So like they would push back on that stuff. Like if you watch the opening to Batman the Animated Series, those dudes have guns.
Yeah.
Like that don't look like lasers. They look like guns. But BS&P, broadcast standards and practices, was much harder on X-Men, or X-Men was much more willing to go along with it. So you have a version of the Dark Phoenix saga where the Shi'ar show up and put the Phoenix on trial for destroying an uninhabited planet.
Yeah, right.
And they're like, oh yeah, the Phoenix is dangerous. It destroyed this planet that no one was on.
Just like in the comics.
Yeah. So the weird thing is you get all these weird adaptations of stuff that's going on, and then they catch up. And you can tell when they catch up because if you go through the comics, they do Age of Apocalypse before it happens in the comics, and they do the Phalanx Covenant as it's happening in the comics.
Yeah.
So it's clearly someone at the show calling up and being like calling up Marvel and being like, okay, what you got? What you got in the pipeline? And so you start getting all these weird, like, crossed wires sort of adaptations of stories in the comics that are happening right now, which I think for me as a viewer was like really intriguing because you watch those Age of Apocalypse episodes and then you see like, oh, but here's the real version of it when you go to the comic book store.
Right.
And that really kind of informed our take on 92, especially the miniseries. Because if you read the miniseries, it's like, you know, if you took that kind of storytelling, like, because it's 2015 when we're doing that book. If the 90s X-Men have done everything the 90s X-Men have done, right? Like, we don't want to just have them fight Omega Red. We don't want to have them fight Magneto or Apocalypse,
right.
Even though we probably should have. In retrospect, we did get canceled after 10. But like our idea was like, well, what if we take that idea? Like, what if we pretend like we're the people in the 90s with that cast, with that world, with that aesthetic, but we've got, you know, when we call up Marvel, we're calling Marvel in 2015, 2016, 2017, and we're going, hey, what's up with the X-Men? We've got 5 minutes for you to tell us. And they tell us, oh, well, right after the 90s, there was this big villain called Cassandra Nova. She's kind of Professor X's evil twin. She tries to kind of take over the X-Men and make new X-Men. Oh, gotta go. And so we have to figure out how to do that story super 90s.
Yeah.
And if you read the book, we do Cassandra Nova in the miniseries. And then the second series, Jubilee becomes a vampire. So we're kind of riffing on Curse of the Mutants.
Yep.
And then our next arc is like a weird space arc that ends up getting cut short that was going to pull in a lot of weird stuff from like Gifted and like the Joss Whedon stuff. So
oh man, that would have been awesome.
It's weird how all that X-Men stuff kind of comes together in that way.
That's crazy. Definitely. I mean, Jack, did any of that make sense to you? Do you even know who Cassandra Nova is? Have you heard of?
I understand it's.
You saw the trading card once.
It's most likely Professor X's twin sister, and she likes pizza.
She loves pizza. You're right. It's her favorite food.
Pizza. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Cassandra Nova was. I think Cassandra Nova was hilarious because in the continuity, she's kind of weirdly complicated. But
yes.
We wanted to, like we were talking about Connell earlier, we wanted to make her the most 90s version of the character we could. So in our version, she's a clone. created by Apocalypse, who was the 23rd failed clone of Professor X. So she's Professor X-23.
That's
so she's
awesome.
also X-23.
Throw in the hair fade and you're pretty much there.
Yeah, put her in a jacket. Well, you did put her in a jacket a little bit.
And then she does have a jacket. She's got a cool jacket.
Yeah.
So.
Have you heard about possibly, the rumors are all over the place, but possibly the next main canon X-Men movie will take place in the 90s because First Class was 60s, Days of Future Past 70s,
Right, now
Apocalypse
they're
80s.
80s, yeah.
But supposedly the Dark Phoenix movie will be in the 90s. Do you think that, if that's the case, do you think they'll draw at all on either your comic or on the show or on the 90s comics?
I know literally nothing about that. I will say this. This is something that Chad pointed out. I actually haven't seen the last two X-Men movies, I think. Just because, like, I don't watch a lot of movies, to be honest.
Yeah.
Like, I hate going to the movie theater, so I always miss out on stuff until it comes on Netflix.
Yeah, I mean, Days of Future Past you might like, but Apocalypse, Jack and I were not fans.
It grew on me on a second turn, but actually, I think the movies have kind of the same problem, same issue that you were just describing with the cartoon, where they kind of have to water things down. Even like Batman versus Superman, they have Doomsday in there, and instead of decimating Metropolis, he knocks over a few buildings in the abandoned warehouse district. Like they can't show entire. I mean, they did Man of Steel.
Well, they already did that in Man of Steel, so yeah, they learned a lesson.
But even the Dark Phoenix saga.
If you guys want to talk about Batman v Superman, like you're gonna need to put another hour on that clock.
That's a big one.
Because I got some feelings. No, Chad saw Apocalypse, and I remember he called me when he got out of the theater because I'm usually up late writing, and he was like, "Hey man, do you want to know how this movie ends?" And I was like, "Yeah, I probably won't see it for a while, so go ahead and tell me." And he's like, "Well, Professor X is fighting Apocalypse, and everybody's talking about how strong Apocalypse is, and then Jean Grey comes over and she says he's not stronger, he's alone, and you have us," and puts her hand on Professor X's shoulder, and like they defeat him together. And I was like, wait a second, you mean like the way X-Men 92 ends? Because that's exactly how we ended X-Men 92.
That must have pissed you off.
I'm going to assume that the screenwriters took that directly from X-Men 92. I think that's only fair.
Look, it actually didn't bother us at all. Like we thought it was more weird than anything else. But
I mean, it's just the X-Men defeating the evil with the power of friendship. That's what's wrong. What's so wrong about that?
I'm all for.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, real quick, we don't want to talk about Apocalypse because you haven't seen it. But the one interesting I think it did do that ties into our conversation is, it's funny, Bryan Singer's 2000 X-Men kind of ushered in the modern comic book era by taking away all the fancy outfits and
stripping everything
taking
down,
all the camp, making it as realistic as possible. And this is in the same timeline, and it's also Bryan Singer and some of the same cast. And it did the opposite. It's the campiest of all the X-Men movies.
For sure.
Psylocke has a big purple unitard on, and it's funny that the way in one movie series, it kind of what comes around goes around.
Yeah. It has adapted with the times. It has evolved, some might say.
I have not watched X-Men the movie, X-Men 2000, in several years, probably like 5 or 6 years. But I think it is hilarious to think about that movie and to think about how much has changed in the past 17 years, where like the next superhero movie I am probably going to go see is going to have like Rocket Raccoon looking like Rocket Raccoon. It's going to have like Celestials in it. It's going to have, like I'm going to go see Thor Ragnarok, and it's going to have Thor and the Hulk looking like Planet Hulk on a planet decorated with Kirby stuff with Celestials and Eternals. And it's like to go back to that.
Jeff Goldblum is playing the game master.
It's like how the political spectrum has shifted, like how Nixon now would kind of be considered left of center.
Yeah, right.
It's like the nerd spectrum has shifted. What once was nerd center is now nerd right.
Yeah.
Well, there was such a weird idea that like, oh well, we have to change it for movies, and like there's even that joke in X-Men where Cyclops is like, oh, you wanted yellow spandex because that's what Wolverine wears in the cartoons, right? Comics are stupid. But then like, if you could go back in time, you'd be like, yeah, dude, put that dude in yellow spandex. There's a talking raccoon and a tree, and it's one of the most successful movies of the year.
Well said, well said.
And it's like Iron Man looks like Iron Man.
Yeah.
Like.
Yeah, no, I'm embracing it. I think it's awesome.
Shifted.
Yeah, it's so weird. I mean, I guess it was Burton's Batman and then the devolution into the Schumacher Batman movies. I guess that was X-Men was a response to that and not wanting to do like the campiness. Maybe
You say devolution, but
look, I enjoy Batman and Robin like as much as the next one, but
I am the guy who thinks of Batman and Robin as the best of those 4 movies.
Wow.
And that's a hard position to defend, but I will stand by it.
Man, I have trouble just saying I like it better than Batman Forever, and I've had to fight for my life in many a scrap.
I actually really like Batman Forever, but that's mostly because Jim Carrey and
I'm
Tommy Lee
curious
Jones.
though. So I'm sure you're repeating yourself all the time here, but why would you say Batman and Robin is better than the Burton movies?
Because it's the one that's fun.
Yeah,
true.
89, I think, is generally pretty bad, honestly. Like, I think it's like the weird part of 89 is how campy it is, because everybody thinks of it as the movie that like made Batman this pop culture phenomenon and like brought him back closer to what he was in the comics. But 89 and Returns are both not playing off of comics. Like in the way that we would think of, like, you can't do a Batman story today without like acknowledging Batman Year One or Dark Knight Returns, which is what we've seen getting recycled in those movies over and over. But like, it's clearly just Tim Burton Batman 66.
Yeah.
Like it's got the colored knockout gas.
Right.
And I think the only big thing is that Batman just kills people left and right, which I am
that's a
not
problem.
a fan of.
But are you saying that the Joker didn't kill Batman's parents in the comics?
Yeah, believe it or not,
That's an invention of Tim Burton.
there's actually I think it's a Morrison comic. I think it's one of those 90s JLA comics where Batman is like trapped in a nightmare world, and he sees the Joker killing his parents, and Batman literally goes, "Oh, this is a hallucination because this makes no sense."
So they're completely two different things, but what's your take on the Batman animated series? Because that obviously draws a lot from the Burton movies.
It doesn't. It doesn't. The animated series clearly happened because of the success of Batman and Batman Returns. I mean, that's like inarguable, you know? Like, it's June 92 that Batman Returns comes out, and it's September 92 that the animated series comes on. But they don't actually have anything in common other than that they are like visually dark. I will say that like I like the aesthetics of Batman 89 a lot, like these sort of weird Art Deco industrialist.
Yeah.
Like the late 80s that were meant to look like the 40s that were meant to look like the 60s, you know?
Yeah, I love that. It's like this super weird timelessness in the Batman the Animated Series. Like they have modern cars, but everything else looks like it's 1940s. There's Zeppelins flying around in the opening credits.
Yeah, they have cars and computers.
Yeah.
But like everything is meant like the visual inspiration for that actually wasn't Batman. The visual inspiration for that was the Max Fleischer Superman cartoons.
Right, yeah.
Which then, you know, like the Max Fleischer Superman influenced Batman the Animated Series, which in turn influenced the Superman Animated Series. Yep. And it all kind of came back around up through Batman Beyond, where you get a far future teen dance rave.
I love Batman Beyond, by the way. That's
who doesn't?
I mean, that's talk about a fun show. I like Batman Beyond. But anyway.
I love the look of Gotham in Batman and Robin. There's the observatory that plays heavily into the plot.
Oh, yeah.
When Mr. Freeze turns it into a giant freeze ray.
Yeah.
And the observatory is literally a giant statue of, I think, Atlas.
Yeah, it's in his hand.
Holding up the observatory. I love that stuff.
Isn't that awesome?
Everything in Batman and Robin is either a statue or neon.
Yeah.
Those are the only two building materials they had available.
That is fair.
Which I think is great.
Yeah. Arnold Schwarzenegger was a bit of both. A neon statue.
I think I am, I'm a big Batman guy, and I think Batman the Animated Series is about as close to like Batman perfection as you get.
Sure.
But it's weird how different it was in terms of aesthetics from 89. Like it's harder to get further from like the Anton First Gotham City that is meant to look like hell erupting through Manhattan than the beautiful Art Deco blimp-laden metropolis that Bruce Timm and Darwin Cook designed.
Yeah. Tying back to our X-Men kind of overall topic real quick. So I think most people would say, you know, Batman the Animated Series really holds up, and that's a show that I've gone back to and watched several times. I tried to watch X-Men the Animated Series a few times, and that is not a show that I think holds up very well. Do you agree, Chris? I mean, you're somewhat of an expert on the show.
It's not without its charm.
That's a very fair way of putting it, yeah. But I remember when I was a kid, like even more so the Spider-Man animated series, which I think holds up a little bit better, maybe not much. But that one
I actually haven't gone back to Spider-Man 94, and I'm kind of afraid to because I have a lot of fond memories.
Would you write a Spider-Man 94 comic?
Oh, absolutely. But if we hadn't gotten canceled, we were going to really push for an annual that would have been like a Spider-Man crossover.
That would have been amazing. Great. Yeah, I mean the
Spider-Man crossover with a Spider-Man comic that did not actually exist at the time, but you know.
That is awesome. But Spider-Man, like I remember they had season-long arcs before that was even a thing. It would be like Sins of the Father, episode XX9XX, and I was always like, man, I'm so lost. Like I missed the first 27 episodes, and I'm jumping in this same episode that I saw all the time where Alistair Smythe was turned into a robot.
They did that in X-Men too,
and they did do that in X-Men.
Weird way.
Yeah. So I think as a kid, I had never actually seen it all the way through in order, and then at some point, probably when it first came on Netflix, I did that, and I kind of petered out halfway through, and I was just like, this is not quite as good as I remember it.
I think X-Men is more interesting than good. Like I think Batman the Animated Series is both interesting and good.
Yeah.
I think X-Men 92 is X-Men the Animated Series,
legally distinct from X-Men 92,
is fascinatingly strange to me, because it does do like in the way that and it's always worth talking about how close they were together. Like I talked about it already on this show, but they come out a month apart, and they couldn't be more different takes on superheroes. And especially if you throw in like the other stuff, you know, they were on Fox Kids with fucking Power Rangers, together. Like in 1994, you had X-Men, Spider-Man, Batman the Animated Series, and Power Rangers all going at the same time on the same network, like right next to each other.
You just described this summer's movie lineup. You have a dark and serious DC movie, crazy make 'em up Marvel movie, and Power Rangers.
Yeah.
And honestly, those are a lot of things that I still have a lot of affection for. You know, like I was doing a Power Rangers episode guide on Comics Alliance.
I saw that, and I was very impressed.
I was so bummed. I mean, I'm bummed for a lot of reasons that Comics Alliance is no longer around, but that was probably the most bumming out thing, because I was like, we're just about to get to the White Ranger stuff.
I know.
And it was just like, taken away.
And I've got like the Die Ranger episodes like locked and loaded. Like I was going to talk about, what's his name? Ko and Saba, like
Saba.
Such a shame.
I had a huge fight with my grandma that day because I was co-raised by my grandma, and we had dinner at 4 p.m. And the White Ranger like premiere was on. It was like a 3-part episode, and I wouldn't come to the table to eat dinner. I was like, no, I have to see.
I gotta see how Tommy comes back.
And then for the next 3 months, I was yelling "White Power" outside in the front yard.
No!
Yeah, I didn't realize.
Yeah.
And got some looks from the neighbors. Although we grew up in Staten Island, so they were approving looks.
Well, some of it, yeah. But I mean, it was a real bummer that that Ranger Station is no longer with us. But it's funny talking about how all of those shows were on at the same time. I remember vividly. I want to say each of them had a like prime time episode. I remember the X-Men premiere was definitely on in prime time. Night of the Sentinels.
Yeah, Night of the Sentinels was on in prime time.
Power Rangers had the Zed.
I remember the Lord Zed one was on, and it was just like, holy shit! Like this guy's going to destroy everything.
Yeah. And my God, these putties are so powerful. How will they ever stop them?
They have Z shields. Oh wait,
you just hit the Z.
Also their biggest weakness. But I remember just like there was definitely an event aspect to like those nighttime premieres that has like stuck with me. Like Lord Zed is a big deal in my mind because I first saw him at 7 o'clock at night.
Yeah, and I think like one of the weird things about it is that Batman the Animated Series is extremely episodic.
Yeah.
It's you get an adventure that starts, finishes in 22 minutes, and there's very little actual continuity. You see like Harvey Dent before he's Two-Face, which I always thought was a really nice touch.
Yeah.
But you don't need to have seen like those Harvey Dent episodes to watch a Two-Face episode that comes later. There are a couple that are linked, Night of the Ninja and Day of the Samurai, being a couple of my favorites. But like X-Men, when I went back and watched that first season, one thing that really surprised me is that Beast is in jail for the whole first season.
Yeah. I did not remember that was the case. Yeah.
I was like, man, like, when is Beast going to come back? Like, they're paying that dude for his voice, right? Like, he's in the opening credits. But no, like, they did a season-long arc about Beast being on trial for being a mutant, which is, again, like, I think it could have been done better. I think, like, a lot of that show could have been adapted better and written better. And there's a lot of it that, like, just frequently does not make sense. Yeah. But, like... I don't think it's bad.
My favorite idiosyncrasy from that, and I've only seen maybe the first season and a half recently. I tried to rewatching the series, and then it went off Netflix. Yeah. But I loved how attached Wolverine was to Morph, because Morph is such a stupid character, and then he dies in the premiere. And, Wolverine is this like cold, aggressive, like macho guy, and no Morph,
my buddy Morph. Hey,
I just always found that endearing too.
Yeah. But what was I going to say? I lost my train of thought now. Something about X-Men. Yeah, it's gone. Anyway.
It's not like we have any
we don't have like an X-Men expert with us. Or...
An expert?
Oh,
sorry.
I think it's just like really, it's really interesting the way they approached the two, like those two aspects of superhero storytelling. And I think it's a very Marvel Comics way versus a very traditionally DC Comics way too.
Yeah.
Where DC books were, for 40 years were designed to be like distinct units that advance the sort of ongoing continuity incrementally. Whereas Marvel books were meant from Fantastic Four #1 to be continuing, that you want to, like, you got to get the next issue if you want to see the next part of the story.
Yeah.
The thing I always think about is the Galactus, like the Galactus trilogy, Fantastic Four 48, 49, and 50.
Yep.
They beat Galactus, who is like space god come down to murder us all. Like, they beat him on like page 11 of that comic. Because if you look at the cover of Fantastic Four 50, it's got fucking Galactus on there, and it's like, this is it. Galactus is here, and then it's like, down like lower, it's like, plus Johnny Storm goes to college. And it's like, yeah, what the absolute like confidence to end the Galactus story and then pick up with Johnny Storm's going to go to college. I hope he makes new friends.
I don't know. I think that probably sold a lot of issues. Like, kids really wanted to know, where's Johnny Storm going to go to college, and what's that going to be like? I'm done with this purple guy.
Pretty much the Fantastic Four, the first two movies, I think did that too. It's like, look, we've got the biggest threat ever. Never mind. He's Lawrence Fishburne.
Also, Johnny Storm might go to college in the next one.
He did. He became Captain America. He won.
He graduated.
He graduated to a better movie.
Much better franchise. I remembered the point I was going to make before, which was, Chris, you were talking about how the series X-Men was kind of very... whatever the opposite of episodic is, and Batman was serial. There you go.
It's and like that Batman, podcast, our arch rival
podcast. And Batman was very episodic and more one-shotty. I feel like that's true, kind of, to an extent, of the comics nowadays. Like, Marvel it seems like they're always going into the next event, and it's like you got Civil War II, and now it's Secret Empire, and everything's touching on those, and there's just like so much to keep track of, and you have to read so many issues. And DC, they're doing their whole Watchmen thing now, but you don't have to read everything. Like, I've been reading the Superman books, and they're really good, and I feel like I don't have to read, the Wonder Woman books to keep up with everything that's going on in the universe.
Well, I think that's partially true.
Yeah.
Like, I think, like, you talk about the Watchmen stuff, but, like, right now, Batman and Flash are having a crossover with that.
Right.
And, there's always something going on that's gonna come in and like have something tie in. But I do feel like the traditional nature of Marvel and DC, Marvel's nature lends itself more to interconnected stories.
Yeah.
And I say that as someone whose like major works for Marvel have all been completely isolated. Like, we did, X-Men 92 took place in its own world. Deadpool Bad Blood is a self-contained graphic novel.
Sure.
We did a Guardians tie-in to Monsters Unleashed, which was very fun. But we got to kind of tell our own story in the context of that. And we've got the Guardians annual coming up that's gonna, like, it's ostensibly a Secret Empire tie-in, but it takes place on the other side of the galaxy. it's a big space adventure that like is informed by those events but doesn't address them directly.
Sure.
But traditionally speaking, you had a much geographically smaller area for those characters that would, like, you know, Amazing Spider-Man #1, what does he do? He tries to go join the Fantastic Four.
Right.
Like, so you always had
which
that.
Which makes sense in that universe. I mean, they're kind of the hot superhero team. Yeah.
And it's what they're doing in the movies. The Spider-Man wants to join the Avengers.
That's a great point. Plus,
and then DC was never really a universe. Like they had they had Justice League. They had, you know, books that crossed over, World's Finest, Justice League, Brave and the Bold. But traditionally speaking, and I've written about this pretty extensively in my old column, DC was patchworked together from characters that were not created by the same people, that were not created to interact with each other, whereas, you know, the Marvel characters were. Like if you look even at the cover of like Daredevil #1, it's like, oh, from the, you know, first we brought you the Fantastic Four, then we brought you Spider-Man. Here's our new hero.
Yeah.
Which is a very bold thing to say. They would have never said that on the cover of like a new Batman title.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
You know, the closest you get is like on World's Finest, where it's like your favorite superheroes together in one magazine. But even when it said that on the cover, it's like 41 issues into World's Finest before they actually team up. They just had a Batman story and a Superman story.
Right.
So it's not until after Crisis, and it's not until the 90s, which is one of the reasons why those DC books from 94 to 98 are so fucking good, because there's a big DC universe behind them.
Yeah. Plus, you had like Marvel, like from the ground up, was basically everyone is in New York. So everyone's like Spider-Man swinging by the Baxter Building and Avengers Mansion. And it's like, it's not the same because you had Metropolis and Gotham City and Coast City. I mean, you know, that's part of what you were saying about having separate universes that were then hastily cobbled together.
Yeah.
But yeah, more of that Marvel by design. And
I think that is kind of reflected, because you do see that affecting the DC universe starting in like the late 80s, where one of my favorite crossovers of all time is Invasion, the Bill Mantlo, Keith Giffen, Todd McFarlane book. Mm-hmm. Because it's 3 issues. It's 3 80-page giants, so they knock that shit out quick. And B, like, it has a lot of really good tie-ins that each treat a different piece of the story in a really cool way. Like the Suicide Squad tie-in doesn't read like the Animal Man tie-in, which doesn't read like the JLA tie-in.
Yeah.
Like, so I like it when you see stuff like that affecting a superhero universe, but I also like it when you just get, you know, what we're getting now with DC, where there's crossovers on the horizon, of course, but right now we're just kind of going through like here's Tom King and David Finch and Miko Yanen's Batman. Here's Tynion and Barrows and Marguerite Bennett and Steve Epting's like Detective and Batwoman. Here's what like the Superman books are bananas right now.
Yeah.
Like, but you know, like the Green Lantern's book is dealing with its own Green Lantern stuff, and you know, there's a little bit of overlap, but you get a lot of really good stories that way.
Yeah, but there is some, you know, self-contained nature to them. Not entirely, because it's still a shared comic book universe. But yeah, that's kind of what I have liked about DC Rebirth.
So we have 7.5 minutes left on the clock. I was wondering if we wanted to talk a little bit more about the actual topic, Mutant Genesis.
Mutant Genesis, yeah.
Because I don't know much about it.
We kind of brought it up and then immediately started talking about other things.
No, see, I think we laid the groundwork.
Sure.
And now I want to know what's going on here.
Now
I know Omega Red's involved.
He sure is,
I know
Jack.
some basic. Connell's not in it, from what I understand.
No, they had to take him out at the last minute when they realized they did not own that character. Yeah, it was... okay, so I remember it starts on Asteroid M, if I remember. So Magneto was just kind of hanging out in space, sipping Cavassier, if I remember right.
Magneto had left Earth.
Yeah.
And he had founded Asteroid M and had basically declared its independence and sovereignty. So, which is... like, I love this comic. I could not love this comic more, I'll be honest with you. But the first thing you see in this comic is Magneto in space, no spacesuit, talking out loud.
That's what's promised on the cover with all that action and all the X-Men, you know, in a firefight. It's
Well, he
Magneto.
could create some kind of field, right? He doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, sure.
Sure, why not?
There's ways around it, but I love that because it's clearly like it's such a cool image.
Yeah,
it's this, it's this big Jim Lee, and he's got like these really cool, like really awesomely represented like lines of magnetic force coming out of his hands as he's tearing apart these spaceships.
Yeah,
and he says, "I am Magneto," and yeah, that dude is in space. Dude, this is where we're starting, and so you get that set up with these. There's mutants that are coming to Asteroid M for Sanctuary. There's people chasing them because they stole a space shuttle. Those dudes never really get mentioned again after that first issue where they play a very prominent part.
Yeah.
And then it cuts to the X-Men. And it's such a perfect comic that exists at the crossroads between the X-Men are more popular than they've ever been. Comics are more popular than they've ever been since like 1945. We're going to do a new number one, but we're going to it's still going to be this guy who's been writing X-Men for 16 years.
Yeah. It's not a total reboot.
Yeah, it's not a reboot at all.
Yeah.
But it's a weird jumping on point.
Exactly.
Because it's like, if you look at it, there's so much text. And it's kind of like, we tried to have fun with that. If you go look at the first page of X-Men 92, the miniseries, it's just it's covered in text for exactly that reason.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like you're describing to me, as somebody is not too familiar. It sounds like you're pretty much saying the same points as you just brought up with the X-Men animated series, where it kind of starts in medias res. It's already got all this backstory, but it's also a new thing. It sounds very similar. It sounds awesome.
Yeah, it's exactly that. It has exactly that feeling, and honestly, I have a lot of weird nostalgia for 90s stuff, as I'm sure you do on this podcast.
Yes, that's great.
I have weird nostalgia for video stores, which were terrible.
Yeah.
I miss there's a part of me that misses VHS tapes, but God almighty, I would never want to own another one. You know?
No, definitely not.
And I kind of miss this feeling of paying $6 to a guy in my reading class in middle school to get this comic because it's X-Men number 1. And I'm like, okay, well, this will start me off. This is where I'll figure it all out. And then opening it and well, that dude's in space. That dude can talk in space, I guess.
There's a story here.
And he's trying to get these nuclear missiles from a submarine that he sank 10 years ago, and he used to be a good guy, but now he's a bad guy, but he was a bad guy before he was a good guy, and he's walking around in his robe.
I love his robe, by the way.
Yeah. Get to the X-Men.
I'm actually looking at his robe right now. I opened up the issue.
Oh, the robe is amazing.
The robe's incredible.
He looks like somebody's stepdad.
coming, hello, boys. What are you doing down here?
The best thing about it is that he's got he's basically wearing footy pajamas and a robe. Because it's a one piece. Yeah, it's like leggings. Piece. He's wearing leggings.
That's amazing.
Did your stepdads not wear one footy pajamas?
Of course they did.
Leggings? Oh, okay.
Magneto was my stepdad. Put that on a t-shirt.
I will say this for Chris Claremont and Jim Lee. The way they introduced the X-Men is one of the coolest things in the world. And this was not the first time I had encountered the X-Men in comics. They did these weird little mass market paperback sized books that I got one at a book fair. Because my mom was a teacher, and so I would go to the book fair at her middle school when I was a kid, even before I was in middle school.
Nice.
We went to the book fair. You don't have to tell. We know.
Yeah,
you're among friends.
We also got beat up at school.
Yeah. So I went to the book fair, and they had this mass market paperback copy of the arcade story that Claremont and Byrne had done, which remains probably one of my top 3 or 4 favorite X-Men comics. And probably sparked my love of death traps in comic books. So I had encountered the X-Men before, but it's such a different group of X-Men because, again, it's that classic lineup of Cyclops, Wolverine, Storm, Colossus, Nightcrawler. I don't even think Kitty Pryde's in that story. She might be. But Rogue's not there. Archangel's not there. Iceman's not there. Jubilee's not there. Wolverine is a very different character. Beast isn't there.
Yeah.
So the way they introduce these characters in Mutant Genesis, they've split the team up, and half the team's on offense, half the team's on defense, and the offense team is kind of coming in to see if they can get past the mansion's defenses. So it's a big danger room scenario where you get to see everybody's like powers, and it ends with the coolest thing I've ever seen at 12 years old, right?
You're talking about the reveal of the villain, Omega Red?
No.
Oh, okay, never mind.
X-Men #1. But I will talk about Omega Red in a minute because I fucking love that story.
Oh, yeah.
Wolverine claws his way up through the ceiling. He's like covered in pieces of dead robots and his costume's all torn up. And he points his claws, like it's an amazing page. He points his claws at Professor X because they've got to like tag Professor X to win. And he goes, "Bang, Charlie." And then he pops his claws and they're like an inch away from Professor X's eyes and he goes, "You're dead." And that's so fucking
That's
badass,
awesome.
right?
Wolverine, pretty badass guy. Yeah.
And then, "Back off, Wolverine. You made your point. Are you nuts or what? You know how dangerous those adamantium claws of yours are. A wave of your arm can slice through solid steel. One slip just now." And I was like, oh right, Cyclops sucks. Cyclops is no fun.
That's exactly right.
Poor Cyclops.
And that's like the moment where it all crystallized for me. So.
that Cyclops was no good, and Wolverine is a bit of a badass.
So we've only got 30 seconds left.
Yeah,
but,
we are running out of
but
time.
I am willing to hit an extension on the button if you really want to go into Omega Red.
I mean, look, Omega Red's great. Like, I was thinking the other day about there's so many phrases that, like, I grew up with that no human being should be used to hearing. Like, I was talking to Matt Wilson, my co-host on More Rocket Ajax, morerocketajax.com, patreon.com/morerocketajax.
Nice.
Like, I was talking to him about, like, how we are so used to hearing the phrase vulnerable to fire and sonics because we read a lot of comics with Venom and Venom's vulnerable to fire and sonics.
Oh, yes.
But like those should not be those words in that combination should not be familiar to anyone.
Right.
You should not be able to just rattle that phrase off in your head.
I was
just
impressed.
something, yeah.
I was
It's just
impressed.
like, of course,
You could
Sonics.
recite that Cyclops monologue just now. That was crazy.
Oh, I've thought about it a lot. and so I feel like Omega Red is the same way because Omega Red has a mutant death factor.
Oh, yeah.
Which is
Wolverine
an amazing
heals.
phrase.
So he dies.
Oh, wow, that's crazy.
And instead of claws, he has tentacles.
Yeah,
I love it.
exactly.
It's amazing.
Chad and I were talking about this, like, back when we first started writing X-Men, we were talking about how, like, you know, Stan Lee is a guy who learned to write dialogue from reading the pulps, right?
Sure.
So all of his dialogue is kind of distinctly over the top and pulpy.
Yeah.
Claremont is that second generation, like the second generation of guys like Roy Thomas and Chris Claremont and Marv Wolfman even. Like, those are the guys who learned to write dialogue reading Stan Lee.
Yeah.
And then you get, you know, the dialogue, like you get the Jim Lees and you know, Jim and Rob and Eric Larson and Todd McFarlane, who are all the guys who were, you know, artists who learned how to tell stories from reading those books. So it's this weird third or fourth generation of comics. And you can see the process if you read these books. And it's so fascinating to me because it goes back to Kirby. And, you know, Kirby is a genius. And part of his genius is that he just puts something together in a way that, like, is one step beyond what's familiar. Right, like the mother box. You know how you get the word mother box? You start with the word motherboard, and then you build a box out of the boards.
I never put that together. You just blew my mind completely.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
If you're Jack Kirby and you're watching the news and they're always talking about how there's problems in the third world, you start to wonder what problems in the fourth world would look like.
Yeah.
And that's how that happens.
That's awesome.
That's incredible.
And then but like that's, you know, that's drawing from like reading popular mechanics and popular science and reading the news. And then you get to Omega Red, and Omega Red is a guy who's drawing Wolverine, who read about Wolverine when he was younger, who saw the phrase mutant healing factor 100 times because Chris Claremont used it. And like that phrase that has become so common because we all know about Wolverine, like Jim Lee is the guy who goes, well, if he's got a mutant healing factor, what's the opposite of that?
That's awesome.
And the opposite is a mutant death factor. And he does it, like, instead of having claws that come out from on top of his hands, he's got tendrils that come out from the bottom of his hands.
Amazing.
Like, it's genius. I genuinely, as I do more work in comics, as I do more writing, as I did more criticism, honestly, and just as I got older, like, I got a whole new appreciation for the creative process behind these 90s comics. Because it's like, it's all right there on the surface. You just have to like look at it right to figure it out.
So, Chris, I don't want to interrupt your Omega Red talk, but how do you get something like Maggot out of that? The most 90s X-Man, in my opinion.
Well, I don't think he's the most 90s X-Men. I think the most 90s X-Men is Adam X, the Extreme.
You know what? You're 100% right.
Yeah, which is, well, okay, I'll tell you the most 90s thought process, and it's one that's genius. Like Rob Liefeld, who again, like I've worked with on Bad Blood, and honestly, that process was incredible. Like, he was super fun to work with. He did an interview where he talked about Cable, who is probably legitimately the most 90s character.
Yeah,
right?
that's a fair point.
And he talked about the process. And you talk about Omega Red, and you're like, okay, Jim Lee's clearly starting at Wolverine and figuring out how to introduce a new character, right? So Rob is trying to come up with a new character. And so he goes, well, who's the most popular characters at Marvel? And it's Wolverine and the Punisher, because it's 1991.
Right.
Those are the most popular characters. So, and he says this on, I think it's on a podcast with Ed Piskor and Jim Rugg, I think. Maybe it wasn't a podcast. Maybe it was just an interview. And he's like, so I created a guy who always carried more guns than the Punisher and had more than 6 knives.
Wow.
It sounds like you're describing The Mask. Jim Carrey.
He had more than 6
Jim
knives.
Carrey, remember he pulled out all the weapons?
I remember. He was a living cartoon character. It was great. Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, that's Cable in a nutshell. It's just Wolverine and the Punisher
Brolin
had a little baby, and it's now Josh Brolin.
Will be playing Cable, yeah.
Absolutely. All
really
right.
should have been Triple H. Just want to throw that out there. Really should have been Triple H.
Man.
I thought Nicolas Cage was one of the rumors. I thought that would have been
Triple
fun.
H would have been great. That guy from Avatar, I can't think of his name, and from Don't Breathe.
No.
He was really pitching hard.
Oh, that guy. Yeah.
No,
I thought you
not
meant Sam Worthington.
Jake Sully.
No, yeah, the guy
bad
from
guy.
Avatar could have been good too.
Yeah, but instead we got Thanos pulling double duty.
You mean Jonah Hex?
Yeah, that's right. Triple duty. I forgot about Jonah Hex. And I saw it in theaters. All right.
I also saw that movie in theaters.
Wait, you don't go to the movies, but you saw Jonah Hex?
Chris, it was you and me.
I had to see that one for work.
We were probably the only 2 people who saw Jonah Hex. We have taken up so much of your time, and we've gone over our 60 minutes here. So I think that's gonna be it for this episode. And
well,
Chris,
for the body of the episode.
for the body, we're not done.
Yeah, we'll
probably go another 20 minutes knowing us. Hey guys, this is Dan cutting in before we get to our What Have We Learned Today to bring you the names of our Patreon patrons who have supported us this week. So big thank you to Mike Bloom. Thanks so much, Mike.
And a big thank you to Leftfoot. Thank you, Leftfoot.
Mike Reed. Thanks so much, Mike.
Jonathan Scherer. Thanks for sharing or suring your money with us.
Agnes Gunther. Thank you so much, Agnes. I think you're German, if I had to guess.
Thank you, Joe Webster. I don't think you're TV's Webster.
Okay.
Why, do you? Do you think it's TV's Webster? You think it's Emmanuel Lewis?
I mean, it could be. I don't see why it can't be. I know he's dead.
He is?
I think he's dead.
Well, this guy's alive. So
all right.
Thank you,
Well,
Joe.
thanks, Joe. Kevin. No last name required. Thank you, Kevin.
I like to think of it as it's Kevin from Home Alone. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're on the same page. That's why we do a podcast.
Absolutely.
Zach Kowalski. Am I saying that right?
Zach Kowalski, probably.
Kowalski. I'm not good with the Midwest Polish names here.
All right.
But thank you, Zach Kowalski.
Kowalski, like Killer Kowalski, I'm sure. And finally, thank you to Fred Lands. Thanks so much, Fred. But Chris, since it is the end of our time, I'm gonna turn to you. You can't see me because we're not doing a video chat. But what did you learn today? Probably not much, but what did you learn?
I learned that there are people who did not collect Marvel superheroes trading cards and had to be explained that no, they were not part of a game. The cards were the thing themselves.
On that note, I learned that one of the reasons I didn't realize Wolverine could heal until I saw X-Men in 2000 was because they didn't really give him that many opportunities to heal on the cartoon.
Yeah.
And I also learned that the 1 year I really dug into comics was the most disposable year in DC history.
Yes, perfect.
The foundation of my comics knowledge.
Yeah.
Hollow like the earth.
That's why you're always bringing up the Millennium Giants and no one knows what you're talking about. about.
Pretty much.
I know.
Chris knows.
One day we're gonna meet in person, and we're gonna wear our Superman red, Superman blue shirts, and we're gonna be the two coolest guys to ever cool.
Absolutely. What did I learn today? I learned that if we could somehow get the fictional character of Superboy from 1994 on this show, it would probably be our best episode ever. And I learned that Bruce Timm had a really awesome Batman sketch up in the writers' room.
Sounds cool.
I really got to see that.
Chris, while we're doing what have we learned, I did have a question I wanted to ask, and we didn't have time for. But maybe you will learn this, or maybe you already knew. Do you know about the connection between the X-Men animated series theme song and Whitney Houston's "I'm Your Baby Tonight"?
I'm your baby tonight.
I think that's a yes.
You'll never unhear it.
Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to mention that.
All right.
That's one of the few things I know. Morph, and I know "I'm Your Baby Tonight."
There you go.
I don't know that Wolverine heals.
Jack, those are two good things to know. If you're going to know anything about the X-Men, it's the Whitney Houston connection, not anything about Wolverine.
Mercy.
Chris, this was phenomenal. Thank you so much for joining us. Where can people find you on the internet?
The best place to go if you want to learn more about me is to go to my website, which is the-isb.com. That'll have links to comics I write. You can pre-order Bad Blood, which is out on May 17th. If you happen to be in North Carolina, I'm going to be doing a couple of signings in the Triangle area. Probably not when Bad Blood comes out, because that is the Wednesday before I get married.
Oh, wow. Congrats.
Congratulations.
We'll be a little too busy to sign that. But if you go to Heroes Con, we'll have copies there of everything. We're going to have Ash vs. Army of Darkness #1 will be out by then. Sword Quest, Bad Blood, all 3 paperbacks of X-Men 92. Those are all available. I also do a couple of digital-only comics on Comixology. And again, you can find links to that on the-isb.com. And I'm on Twitter at the ISB, THEISB. And I got a bunch of podcasts, too. I do 5 of them now.
Very
Wow,
impressive.
that is more than twice what we do. Yeah, I'm a big fan of War Rocket Ajax, which you mentioned earlier, but it's a phenomenal show. If you liked all this comics talk, you can get that on a weekly basis.
What are your other
And if you like
podcasts?
90s stuff, we do one's called Sailor Business, which is a Sailor Moon episode-by-episode podcast.
Nice.
And one is the spin-off called Xena Warrior Business, where it's an episode-by-episode Xena podcast, which is also very fun.
Just don't do Empty Nest, because we already have we already called
We may have done an Empty Nest podcast.
We did threaten to do a home improvement podcast. Me and Matt.
If you did, we'd listen to it.
Absolutely.
Also, my mother is getting married, and she just moved down to North Carolina, so maybe I will go down there, skip the wedding, and go see you.
What a good son. What a good son, Jack. Yeah, so that's great. And check out Chris's comics. They're Comixology or your local comic book retailer. Jack, where can we find you on the internet?
I am much more localized because I have nothing. I have contributed nothing to society.
Yes.
I'm at Jackie No Breaks.
I'm at Then Dan Says. The show, as always, is at 90s Percentile, and our general Twitter, which is at We Studios Pod. And if you want more episodes of this show or our Simpsons podcast, worst episode ever, you go to WePodcast.com. That's WEEPodcast.com. And if you want to support us, you can do that directly through our Patreon, which is patreon.com/WeStudios, or you can just go to Patreon. Nope, you can go to Amazon.wepodcast.com.
You're
shop
getting
like
the
you normally
ways
would.
they can give us money.
I know.
mixed
I
up.
just want that money. Give us all your money. You can just send us a big sack with a $sign on it. We'll take that. No, Amazon.wepodcast.com. It'll take you right to Amazon. Shop like you normally would. We would get a small cut. And
if you're going to buy Chris's comics in
Yeah.
print, then definitely do it through Amazon.wepodcast.com.
help all of us out if you liked what you heard tonight. And if you don't want to spend any money, you can give us a 5-star iTunes review. That helps us a lot. And I don't think we have a review, so we won't read one.
Just shout at people. Just, if you see somebody down the street, go, hey, you.
90s Percentile.
WePodcast.com, WEPodcast.com. Just yell it as quick as you can.
90percentile.com will take you to the same place.
Chris,
So-
I hope we can get you back on sometime. We'll actually jump in without a safety net into the random topic generator. And I got to tell you, we get some weird, we don't pick the topics. Our listeners do. And there's some weird ones in there.
Yes. We had to talk about Columbine briefly.
Oh, God.
I am ready for it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here tonight, Chris. We had some technical difficulties. We took up a lot of your time, so we really appreciate that.
Glad to hear you're still getting married after we destroyed your fiance's internet. But
I think we'll be fine.
Good to hear. Good to hear. So that's going to do it for this episode of 90s Percentile. My name is Dan.
My name is Jack, and we'll see you in another decade.